Welcome, everyone, to the latest installment of the DOA Podcast. Of course, this DOA stands for Decisions, Opinions, and Analysis. I am your host, Jeff Ward, and the plan today is to cover the plethora of smaller but no less fascinating local news stories, some not so local, that have dominated the firstward.net recently. But before we go down that road, I want to highly encourage you to listen to Pineapple Street Studios' Project Unabomb. And when I ask you to listen, I mean all episodes, not just number 3, which of course involves yours truly. As only someone who lived through it can tell you, they've done a phenomenal job. They have nailed this thing from every detail right down to the mood of the investigation. You know, we all have those forging stories, those tales of what made us who we are. But how often does your central forging story get released on a global scale, in many cases, in your own words? So again, I get nothing for promoting this. I got nothing for participating. I enjoyed the process. And despite the fact that I lived through that nightmare, I find the entire podcast process a fascinating one. All right, let's move forward. My current favorite First Ward story is on the Democratic war on women. Yes, the Democrats are waging war on women. And you'd think, considering what Republicans are doing to, the female species, that the Democrats couldn't possibly lose this battle. But every time the Republicans destroy the Constitution, somehow rescind or overturn longstanding federal law, suppress minority voters, the Democrats look them squarely in the eye and say, hold my beer. And then they do something so much more stupid that everyone ignores this ongoing Republican malfeasance. When the Supreme Court did overturn Roe v. Wade, I was like, wow, I'm a little shocked. Even with that draft out there, I really thought they'd never do it. I mean, some of those justices lied through their teeth when they said Roe was settled law. But once they did pull the trigger, I thought, wow, okay, well, here's a real opportunity for the Democrats to, take this message and run with it. It's abundantly simple. How can anyone screw up abortion rights equals women's rights? It's incredibly difficult to do. Oh, but the Democrats just did it because now they refuse to use the word woman or women in the abortion debate. Some idiot just out of college, speechwriter noted that maybe some transgendered female somewhere, in Schenectady, New York, would take offense at the use of the word women or woman. And so what they have decided to do in their inimitable wisdom, they, the Democrats, not they, the pronoun, is to apply the word birthing people or people who menstruate in place of women, mothers, etc. As Bill Maher said, only the Democrats could take the first word a human animal understands, mama, and turn it into something that only 4 Trotskyites at Berkeley would understand. So while the Democrats continue to persist in supporting an insurrection that's falling apart day by day, they're not being held accountable because the Republicans, they put out memes that say, you've got mothers scratched off. You could kind of see it in the background that say Happy Birthing People's Day. And that is such an egregious, woke piece of bullshit that it minimizes the real damage Republicans are doing to this country. So for a few seconds, I felt like, well, maybe November 8th, well, that's Illinois, the Illinois election anyway. Maybe November 8th won't be, actually, I think it's national. Maybe November 8th won't be the Democratic bloodbath I thought it might be, but no, it will be. Because all they have to say, is birthing people, and yet people aren't going to be able to vote for Democrats. And I'm going to say it again. I want everyone on this planet to be happy. I want them to be their authentic selves. I want them to feel fulfilled in what they do. But the Democratic Party's insistence on pandering to the 0.58% transgender community to the exclusion of all other voters is so beyond baffling. It is such a recipe for electoral destruction that I can barely fathom it. And then when they do go down in flames in November and they lose the House, they're going to look at each other, point fingers, and wonder how this could have possibly happened. And then they'll finally conclude that their message wasn't progressive enough. I never thought I'd live to see the day where my brand of centrist moderatism now almost seems to be dyed-in-the-wool conservative. I mean, if it wasn't so destructive to this country, to the debate, to women, it would be almost funny. But, for Jeff Ward, a classic Evanston liberal, to be a conservative by default, boy, that really says something about the current political debate. All right, moving on. In my July 17th column, again, on thefirstward.net, I covered Elgin Community Task Force on Policing's Chairman LaJewel Krigler's meltdown at the final June meeting. The last meeting in June would be a better way to say that. And my theory for her ire and temper tantrum directed at the rest of that board was that the group's moderators, Kearns and West, had finally insisted that the task force move along, that they had till September 1st to accomplish something, and if they didn't, the plug would be pulled. But as it turns out, that had nothing to do with Krigler's meltdown, and in fact, I should have known better than to compliment the incompetent moderators who haven't managed to direct this group in the least effective, who have managed to direct this group in the least effective manner possible. I mean, they've gotten absolutely nowhere. But a couple of sources told me that the real reason for Krigler's tirade was that one of the final proposals approved by the group was to hire more and not less Elgin police officers. Their theory being that the current batch of officers were overworked, and that can lead to, impatience. That can lead to issues when you don't have a large enough pool of police officers and overtime becomes more and more necessary. And of course, as overtime becomes more frequently necessary, it takes a bigger bite out of the taxpayer's wallet. So as I wrote, I thought this was a great suggestion. Let's mitigate two problems with one stone. But though she hasn't said it out loud, it would appear that LaJewel, and again, I really like LaJewel. It's unfortunate that she went down this road because I think she had a lot to offer the city of Elgin. And now her political career is over. But LaJewel clearly adheres to the defund the police kind of methodology, the defund the police movement. And so when the group came up with something that directly opposes that notion, she couldn't handle it. And she couldn't handle it because she has no experience, nor does almost anyone in that group, in being on a government body, much less being a chairman of a government body. Most chairmen understand that you have no power. All you do is moderate the meeting per Robert's Rules of Order. That's it. If you want to accomplish anything as the chairman of any government board, you have to be able to cajole your board members to see it your way. And if you don't, well, it's not likely going to happen because you only have one vote. And in most cases, you don't even have a vote. You can only break ties. So when Krigler said things like, you're not listening, this group is, let's just say it's for black people. And, it got worse after that. Again, if you want to go back to my July columns, this one's very easy to find on the First Ward. It was a reaction to a reality that she did not foresee. So Krigler resigned at that end of June meeting. Then she told the press she hadn't resigned because she hasn't submitted a letter of resignation. And then she resigned again, claiming that this group wasn't serving the Black community. Well, it was never intended to serve just the Black community. It consistently amazes me how that predominantly African-American task force just dismissed Hispanics who outnumber them in Elgin by over 9-1. As I'm frequently prone to saying, and I'm surprised I'm still alive as a result, there's no bigotry quite like minority bigotry. And it's particularly surprising when this kind of thing comes at the hands of people who've had to face intolerance their entire lives. And in that regard, critical race theory, as it originally stood, is correct. We're all tribal. We're all racist. So who's ever in charge, whoever's, whatever the majority is, white, Black, Hispanic, we all tend to act in the very same manner. So since we're on the subject, let's stick with the task force for the next story. Because another one of their proposals, and this has kind of been a favorite of Marcus Banner, one of the more thoughtful members of that group, is to create a Citizens Police Review Board to offer advice and consent on Elgin Police Department disciplinary matters. And it's not a bad idea. I mean, Marcus's issue has been that it will have no real power, and thus, in the words of the talking heads, it will be same as it ever was. But I disagree. I've covered so many advisory bodies over in my journalistic time that I've always been pleasantly surprised how much power, for lack of a better word, the positive effect they tend to have. It seems like the more perspectives you have within the bounds of reason, focused on a government issue, the better off you are. So my column theory to my good friend, Mr. Banner, was, hey, Marcus, start with where you are. A journey of 1,000 steps doesn't begin with the 16th step. It begins with the first. Create this group. As long as it fully represents those halcyon Elgin demographics, I think we're good to go. And if this group proves its mettle, if it has at least some folks on it with a law enforcement perspective, I think you're really onto something. But no, when the proposal came forth, the group, the task force, stipulated that the members had to include no fewer than 4 Black members, no fewer than 3 Hispanic members, which actually is a vast improvement, but it's still completely disrespectful of Elgin's far more vast Hispanic community, and no fewer than 4 women. And while I understand their logic and what they're trying to do, the problem is it's patently illegal. And the irony is, the reason it's patently illegal is those same statutes that prevent old white males from keeping Blacks, women, and Hispanics off boards are the one that will prevent this group from issuing the same sort of quotas. Can't be done. And it still begs the question, why do Blacks get virtually half the representation when they're just under 6% of the community? It's certainly a fascinating form of reverse discrimination. In real life, if this group really was representative of Elgin, it would have 4 Hispanic members, 3 white members, 1 Asian member, and 1 Black member, some of whom would likely be women. And while I do blame these task force members for not understanding the law, there's no excuse. If you're going to serve on a government body, know the law. I'm going to hold the group's moderators, Kearns and West, far more liable for allowing a proposal to make it through the entire process that's patently illegal. And not only is it patently illegal, when that particular proposal hit the press, it eliminated the minuscule credibility the task force had left. And the incompetent Kearns and West has received $250,000 to get this group absolutely nowhere in 2 long years. So that proposal, and likely I think they have like 50 others, which is another form of insanity, are likely all going down the drain. I'm sure the city council, and in the end, all I can say is this task force has been a debacle since square one. It's gotten worse every step of the way. And I have spoken with some of the powers that be, and it will end, mercifully, September 1st, regardless of any other possibility. And it was doomed to fail from the start. You stack a board with progressives. You have no law enforcement perspective to round out, the right thing to do to, at least explain to some folks why certain things are a certain way. And then the group turned into an echo chamber where they simply listened to each other. The incompetent moderators didn't help one bit. I wish I could get a gig like that. Because I could do it in my sleep. And it's just all gone off the rails. They're going to try to make the best of it. But you know that when the city council gang of 4, Elgin city council people, John Steffen, Carol Rauschenberger, Corey Dixon, and Tish Powell will no longer even mention this group, it's over. Oh, and since we're on this topic, I do want to dispel a rumor around the listening session the task force held, I want to say in late July. They should have done that first, not last, but they did. And there was a rumor going around that a Courier News reporter, Gloria Casas, was asked to leave by one of the Kearns and West moderators. And it came from a pretty good source, but I did apply my due diligence. I spoke to the Mayor Dave Captain, and I spoke to Gloria Casas, and nothing of the kind happened. They have no clue how the rumor got started. They simply asked Gloria to identify herself if she was going to stay, which is reasonable when there's a reporter in the room. But Gloria couldn't stay because reporters are so overwhelmed with work these days, she had to move on to other things. So as I duly noted on the first ward, this group has done a great job of coming up with the most fascinating self-destructive methodologies on their own. They really don't need any help from anybody else. So it's always good when you can dispel a rumor. All right, let's move south to the City of Light, that always fascinating Illinois' second largest city of Aurora. And the most recent news there is Richard Irvin's, the mayor Richard Irvin's not so triumphant return to that city after a disastrous Republican campaign for governor. No one will soon forget that the mayor spent just short of $50 million to finish in a distant third place, which came out to about $440 a vote. It's the kind of electoral debacle that's reminiscent of George McGovern versus Richard Nixon. And as you might imagine, the man who has refined pathological lying to an art form is now trying to rewrite history. He's kind of trying to claim that, he always wanted to be the mayor of Aurora in the first place. He's going to do all sorts of things now that he's back. He's going to focus on the downtown, in the end, we all know it's all bullshit. He's just trying to, it's kind of a Grimm's fairy tale-esque case of sour grapes. Not to be outdone, 2 of Richard's more sycophantic alder people, Patty Smith and Sherman Jenkins, they welcomed him home. They support him wholeheartedly. You know what? And they can crow till the cows come home, and it's not going to change a thing. Because now that Richard has run for governor, he's been exposed for what I've known, although don't get me wrong, he fooled me initially, for a couple of years. I mean, he is a pathological liar. He's a conservative and liberal fraud, and that's not easy to do both. He's a womanizer with at least 5 baby mamas. He hires his girlfriends to 6-figure city jobs. He's the poster boy for pay-to-play politics. His ethics are beyond questionable, as noted in him starting a business while mayor with Aurora's CIO and his BFF, Michael Pegas. And that's after he and former police chief Kristen Zeman conspired to put the kibosh on an FBI investigation of the same Michael Pegas. So, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I apologize if I'm not. But the worst part for Richard is he just spent the better part of a year painting himself as a Trump Republican conservative, which is kind of what you have to do to win Republican primaries these days. And now he's going to come back to the abundantly liberal Aurora and somehow convince them that, I didn't mean any of it. That's just not going to happen. Irvin tried to blame, that meddling kid, Governor Pritzker and his dog, for this incredibly poor showing. But nothing could be further from the truth, because if you look through the Kane County election results, you'll quickly see that in more than one Aurora precinct, less than 1%, with a real race for governor on the line, less than 1% of Aurora Republicans voted in some precincts. And then it averages out to maybe 7% after that. And in those precincts, Richard and Avery Bourne, his lieutenant governor candidate, were lucky if they got 30% of the vote. So not only did Richard only get 19% of his home county vote, which is incredibly difficult to do, but he couldn't get more than 30% of a precinct in his own hometown. And let me tell you, the Aurora political sharks are now well aware there's blood in the water, and he's not going to get 2 lightweight candidates like Judd Lofgee and John Lesch to run against him next time. He's likely going to get a real Hispanic contender who will be smart enough, to make deals to keep other people out of the race. And Richard is going to be thrown back into the private sector, a place where he's never really succeeded and he so richly deserves. I mean, think about it. You can't even get 30% of the vote in the city you're mayor of. That is the kind of repudiation that we don't see very often. So Mayor Irvin can tie up this pile of manure in a bright red bow and put all sorts of decorations on it, but it doesn't change the fact that he's pretty much through in politics. But the worst part of Irvin's disingenuous image rehabilitation attempt is the Beacon News direct participation in it, because I got most of the information on, Richard's post-defeat thoughts from a column by veteran reporter Steve Lord. I mean, it's true that Steve tends to phone things in, but when you consider that the Beacon's parent newspaper, the Chicago Tribune, uncovered all manner of Richard Irvin malfeasance, you'd think the Beacon News would pursue that as the last remaining major Aurora newspaper. But not only have they failed to do that, Lord penned a piece essentially extolling Irvin's virtue, frequently in Irvin's own words. I mean, it's almost as if, and I have no proof of this, that Lord is angling to be hired by the city of Aurora. Or as I put in the column, he has his lips so firmly attached to Irvin's ass, they'll need to be surgically removed. Look, I know some people are going to think this is sour grapes my own part for no longer writing for the Beacon News or the Courier News, but no, nothing could be further from the truth. I enjoyed my time with both papers. I was trained by some of the best editors on the planet. And when it was time to go, I went. It's really that simple. But, it's hard to see this once proud newspaper descend into nothingness. And I understand the Tribune won't put a dime into any of the suburban papers, but that doesn't mean you just throw up your hands and give up. And when you consider the rest of the Beacon News columnists, some freelancers, some in staff, they've recently written columns on clearing backyard buckthorn, birds, Eddie Munster, slavery, and a retiring disc jockey. I don't know. Apparently there's nothing else going on in the city of Aurora, not the least of which is a disingenuous mayor trying to rehabilitate himself under the auspices of reporters who should not let that happen. And now I have to retract a prediction that didn't even last a week, and this retraction likely leads to another one. The life of a journalist is not an easy one. If you recall, and I'm sure some of you do, whether it was my post-primary recap column or my post-primary recap podcast, I predicted that Republican gubernatorial nominee Darren Bailey would prevail over J.B. Pritzker based on a vast COVID anger. Mothers are dealing with, well, and fathers too, but primarily mothers are dealing with the immense fallout from a year or more of remote learning. There aren't enough therapists for kids out there, and it's generally become a nightmare scenario. So I thought, if you aggravate women, it is the best way to lose an election. So I thought as long as Bailey tacked back to the middle, which most conservative candidates do in general elections, and stayed on message, he'd beat Pritzker despite the amount of money involved. But then Bailey's response to the July 4th Highland Park mass shooting, was inexplicable. It was something that a remedial sixth grader, had they read it, would have said, "You're really going to say that?" To quote the candidate, "Friends, let's pray for the law enforcement and even the organizers of this parade. They've done an amazing job. There's a lot of confusion and frustration that the parade has been canceled, but they did the right thing because people's safety has got to come first. The shooter is still at large, so let's pray for justice to prevail, and then let's move on and celebrate the independence of this nation." Let's move on after 16, 17 people were killed? That kind of tone deafness makes Donald Trump seem like Mr. Rogers. Let's move on. And Bailey got hammered in newspapers from Chicago to New York for that kind of absolutely insane statement. And Bailey can't afford this because much like it was in the primary when, Uline company owner Robert Uline gave him a last-minute infusion of some $10 million, Bailey had to run a solid campaign to bring in the kind of dollars that would come in if conservative donors thought he could win. But since that statement, the Tribune reported that Bailey's only been able to raise about $400,000. And come on, J.B. Pritzker spends that on lunch. So I retract my prediction. I think, sadly, we'll be saddled with Governor Pritzker for another 4 years. And now this calls Tom DeVore's candidacy for Attorney General into question. I said back at that time that if Tom cleaned up his fourth grade playground act, primarily displayed on social media, he would have a real shot at enjoying the same kind of, COVID anger phenomenon. But now with Bailey seemingly out of the picture, I suppose things can change in 3 months. DeVore now doesn't have much of a shot. So we're probably stuck with Kwame Raoul for the next 4 years. And if Bailey does lose, which I am now predicting, it's nobody's fault but his own. How can you bungle a message after a mass shooting? It is, and this is a guy who's won elections. He's served in the state Senate. How can you possibly screw that one up? That brings us to our last story. And by the way, I call this format Quick Hits on the blog, and I think it would suit this. So every now and then we'll do a DOA Quick Hits where we cover a number of stories. They're always kind of fun. They're fun to listen to and they're fun to do. But our final story is The Judge Won't Budge. Again, my earlier column on Judge Susan Clancy Bowles, former chief judge and current, full circuit court judge here in Kane County, chopping down her neighbor's trees and, in the words of a Geneva police officer, butchering them the second her neighbor went on vacation. I wrote a column about it, considering that Judge Bowles is running for an appellate court seat. I figured the embarrassment would, quote, encourage her to accept my friend Joy's reasonable settlement offer, which is, hey, remove the unsightly 12-foot stump. And I mean, the photographic evidence is incontrovertible, and simply plant a row of arborvitae to replace the missing tree. And Bowles, who makes about $210,000 a year, won't budge. She claims, despite that photographic evidence, that she only trimmed the branches on her side of the property line, which would be legal if that's what she did. But she clearly didn't. So now Joy is going to likely sue for the missing tree, for the reduction in property value, and it's going to be a slam dunk case. I mean, but to go to court, to have something like this with such a simple settlement offer and reasonable, to have something like this go to court when a sitting judge as the defendant is so far beyond the pale that this woman shouldn't be judging second grade cutest pet contests. And if you think I'm going to let you forget about this around Election Day, you'd be foolish, because I plan on hammering this home until Judge Bowles does the right thing. You don't cut your neighbor's trees down when they're on vacation just because you think you can get away with it. And that'll do it. We've covered quite a bit today on this Quick Hits version of Decisions, Opinions, and Analysis. I am your host, Jeff Ward. I appreciate the fact that you listen. Again, without you, there's no columns, there's no podcast. And as I like to sign off with, let's continue the conversation. Until next time.